Thank you for the permission. A little over a week ago, while sitting at the airport waiting for Reverend Ann Barker's plane to arrive, I was listening to Canada's new cabinet being sworn in by the Governor General. Yes, I'm always into interesting things. As someone who's something of a throwback to simpler times, when a person's word was their bond, and when there was an expectation that refined people, at least, would speak directly but diplomatically, the very need for oaths disappoints me. I'm almost Amish in this regard. Like the Quakers, I'm resistant to the pretense of oaths, which feel like the adult version of a double pinky swear. Still, I recognize that for those who may have trouble keeping their promises or speaking truthfully, oaths raise the stakes and have some value in both focusing the attention of the oath maker and providing sanctions if and when they fall short. So we have oaths when people assume public office, whether a legislator or an army private. We swear in jurors and witnesses in courts of law. We sign what amounts to an oath when we enter into a contract or execute a will. Even the pledges made in a wedding ceremony, or the promises between ministers and congregations during ordination and installation ceremonies, take the form of oaths, even though they are not accompanied by the kind of sanctions found with other oaths. These oaths entail promises about future conduct. They underscore the essential value of truthfulness and faithfulness, and they serve as declarations of intent. But back to last week's swearing in of the cabinet. For new ministers, the oaths proceeded in 3 stages. First, an oath of allegiance to the king, which is essentially an oath to the country and its system of governance, of which the crown is a symbol. Secondly, an oath as a member of the Privy Council, which is mostly all cabinet ministers, past and present, as well as a few other august members of this inner circle. And finally, an oath related to their specific portfolio. 3 separate oaths. The first 2 oaths effectively last a lifetime, the third only for the duration of a particular portfolio. So if you were watching along with me, better than I thought, if you were watching along with me, you would have noticed that some of the older cabinet ministers who you may have grown to doubt long ago didn't have to swear all 3 oaths. But that doesn't mean they're not bound by them. It was the second oath that caught my attention, though. I've been listening to these for years, for my whole adult life, because of my peculiar obsession with such matters. And it was only now that I've reached retirement age, that I listened closely to that second oath. I won't quote it in its entirety, but only the sentence that really stood out to me. I will in all things to be treated, debated, and resolved in Privy Council, faithfully, honestly, and truly declare my mind and my opinion. Let me repeat that. I will in all things to be treated, debated, and resolved in Privy Council, faithfully, honestly, and truly declare my mind and my opinion. This is very different than the oath that cabinet ministers in another country near us take when they are installed in office. And it occurred to me that the very difference between oaths may help to explain in part the differences between our two countries, and perhaps even help to explain why civil discourse, while it is indeed challenged in our own land, is still a little more civil these days than some of what we overhear when we have our cup affixed to the room next door. If you think about this oath, if you want to frame it in other words, silence is not an option if a cabinet minister is to fulfill the obligations of their office, nor is obfuscation. Strictly speaking, a member of the cabinet in this country is not permitted to go along to get along, at least not before they have declared any objections and reservations they may have and have offered their own wisdom to cabinet deliberations. Sycophants need not apply to be cabinet ministers in this country. What a difference that makes in the current context. You don't get to show up to a press event, a media spectacle, pretending to be a cabinet meeting, and just nod in simple agreement with everything that the leader has to say. You don't get to pretend that every decision they make is wise, that everything they do is right, that everything they say is truthful, because doing so would violate your oath of office. Our oath for cabinet ministers isn't just an oath to uphold our Constitution and our way of government. It is a promise within the privacy of the Privy Council as a cabinet minister to speak up when you think something is going wrong. If you see something, say something is embedded in that oath. It echoes the oaths made by witnesses in a court of law. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Each of those phrases is important. There are real penalties that follow if a witness can be shown to have lied. Once again, my quaint sense of honor believes that people shouldn't need to swear an oath to confirm that they're speaking truthfully. But my experience in life has taught me that my expectations are unrealistic, and that many people's truthfulness is little better than truthishness in the absence of an oath and its sanctions, whether it is God or the law that steps in to be the enforcer. Oaths have a way of focusing the mind on a more precise rendering of what is professed to be true. It removes a little of the sloppiness in the flourish with which we may sometimes speak. Here in Canada, it might be reasonably concluded that two members of our federal government, Jody Wilson-Raybould and Chrystia Freeland, resigned from cabinet in recent memory because of the seriousness with which they took their oaths of office. Having faithfully, honestly, and truthfully declared their minds and their opinions in cabinet, they found that conscience prevented them from remaining. Now, just to be clear, I'm not judging other ministers who found no reason to do the same, who felt confident in remaining at the cabinet table, for I trust that they honestly remained part of the consensus. This isn't about passing judgment on the correctness or incorrectness of opinions, but rather noting how individual cabinet ministers may be moved, may be called to act in particular ways because of their sense of obligation to the oath to be truthful, faithful, honest in their work. And so I can admire a whole cabinet, even one that differs with one another when they meet. I simply want to draw your attention to what a conscientious leader might do when the truth they profess comes into conflict with the role they fill. It has not been my experience, and I have been involved in the political life of this country since before I was an adult and entitled to be there. It is my experience that our cabinet ministers, our legislators, our city councilors, our school trustees, most public servants in this country actually don't lie on behalf of the people they serve with. But they will disagree publicly when disagreement is called for. So I think our sycophancy quotient in this country is rather low compared to others, because we don't expect blind obedience to a person, but rather obedience to a set of values, a belief in the truth, and an expectation that even though we have collaborative government in the form of cabinets, we nevertheless expect people to be honorable and honest. I cannot imagine a single cabinet secretary in the United States right now doing the same. Little Marco has proven to be even smaller than his current boss professed. They swear no oath to declare their minds and opinions faithfully, honestly, and truthfully. And to be blunt, it shows. The entire cabinet of the United States currently consists of what we in parliamentary lands call strangers to the truth, who betray no shame while bearing false witness on behalf of the most untruthful, dishonest man ever to occupy the White House. Policy differences are one thing, but the brazen disregard for truth is deplorable. And the inability to distinguish between truth and opinion, truth and prejudice, truth and gaslighting is contemptible. It's one thing to have a single liar leading any hierarchy, but the country to our south has devolved into a society in which many people are no longer able to distinguish between truth and fiction, fact and fantasy. Genuine information has been displaced by misinformation and even disinformation. Social media has emerged as one of the most antisocial forces in human affairs. And propaganda has triumphed over critical thinking, while gullibility has overcome common sense. If truth isn't already dead, it's on life support. Gaslighting has become as poisonous to society as a gas leak is poisonous in our homes. Truth dies when people, especially leaders, are not held accountable for their fabrications, rationalizations, and outright lies. Truth dies when a mass of people becomes too hypnotized, too indifferent, too cynical to care anymore. In his book on tyranny, Timothy Snyder notes that truth dies in 4 modes, each of which has accelerated over the past half-century, especially the last decade. Open hostility to verifiable reality, shamanistic incantation, magical thinking, and misplaced faith. These are the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that we have feared since biblical times. As truth dies, we become vulnerable to cynicism and indifference, which serves the interests of the authoritarian state. The first mode is the open hostility to verifiable reality, which takes the form of presenting inventions and lies as if they were facts. The very notion of alternative facts is perhaps the most audacious example of this in recent years. It is increasingly difficult to argue, let alone discuss, but we must endeavor to do so anyway. And to be able to have meaningful arguments with one another, which are a healthy thing, we must be able to agree that there is a difference between fact and fancy, that truth still matters to us. The second mode is shamanistic incantation. This is seen in the endless repetition of baseless assumptions, half-truths, and outright lies until they come to be mistakenly accepted as factual. Build the wall and lock her up, mentions Snyder. I would add drill, baby, drill. And if you're looking for a Canadian example, let's go with axe the tax. They sound good. They fit onto a bumper sticker, but as meaningful discourse, they are garbage phrases, and we would do well to do away with them. It takes time and space, sometimes whole sentences and paragraphs, even whole essays, to be able to say something meaningful and true. We need to reclaim the ability to do so. While it may well be the case that great truths can be encapsulated in short, pithy phrases, love is the spirit of this church, for example, more often than not, when we hear clever slogans, it is reasonable to suspect that we are being misled. The next mode is magical thinking, or the open embrace of contradiction. Now, we should never dismiss the reality of paradox, and I love a delicious paradox in literature and in life. But there is a difference between a paradox and a contradiction, and we need to be extraordinarily careful about the latter. When politicians promise to cut everyone's taxes while reducing government debt, control inflation while implementing tariffs, promote the public interest while privatizing assets, they are presenting contradictory ideas. As surely as when a minister promises to spend all of his time with the youth, or all of her time caring for the elderly, or to focus exclusively on the business affairs of the church while devoting all of their energy to the spiritual needs of the congregation. These are contradictory assertions, and anyone does well to be suspicious of those who make them. The final mode is misplaced faith. When people look for a savior and invest any individual or party or cult or secular society or coffee shop with the authority to do whatever they wish in the hopes of making things better, they are engaged in a kind of idolatry that typically leads to ruin. None of these qualities is the sole province of the far right, by the way. I wouldn't say that they're evenly distributed, but they can be found across the political spectrum and in every religious community and philosophical school. What is truth? Asked Pontius Pilate when Jesus stood before him, before surrendering any pretense to truth or justice. Sometimes people ask this question because they wish to do nothing says Snyder, before noting that generic cynicism can be quite fashionable, even though it's a slippery slope towards indifference. What is truth? Asked members of this congregation some 30 years ago, when we debated whether our affirmation should read, "Seek the truth in love," with the definite article attached, or simply "Seek truth in love," which provided a little more wiggle room. There was a certain agnosticism about whether the truth actually existed, as opposed to the idea that it does, even though we may be quite incapable of discerning what it is with any degree of certainty. Gandhi was more confident when he declared, "Truth is the only God." We do not live by abstract truth, observed Universalist minister Clarence Skinner. Even mathematicians want families and friends, and no doubt a philosopher has moments when he wishes there were someone to feed him his favorite pudding. We are persons, and we crave virtue in terms of persons. The Word was made flesh not once, but eternally, whenever wisdom is born. The truth that strikes fire is the truth that can incarnate itself in a life. We know justice and righteousness only when we see them living and moving among us. It is the nature of all sound ideals that they pass rapidly from theories to lives. It's not always convenient to believe in truth. It's even more difficult to be the truth, to seek to incarnate in our own lives what is honest and truthful and dignified. It is tempting to believe what we wish to hear rather than what is actually the case, to favor our desires over facts, to rationalize our own behaviors rather than to live into the truths we hold dear. But when we can no longer tell the difference between the true and the appealing, democratic life becomes vulnerable, because freedom depends upon citizens who are able to make a distinction between what is true and what they want to hear, says Timothy Snyder. I agree. Believe in the truth, he says. No matter what, believe that truth is real, that truth still matters, that our knowledge of what is true and what is false can be restored as individuals and as a society. For to abandon facts is to abandon freedom. Please join in the closing hymn, number 345, "With Joy We Claim the Growing Light."